Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of our GEMA Talks vidcast series. Today, I want to welcome Louise Lague. Louise, hello.
Hello.
Good to have you today. So Louise is a longtime, awesome Hoya who has had an incredible, fascinating, distinguished career, primarily in the world of journalism. She was a long-time journalist and writer at People magazine, and we'll talk a lot about that today, and a freelance writer and a book author, and also interestingly made a pivot later in her career to counseling and being a counselor and a therapist. So interested to hear about that as well. So a lot of interesting ground to cover today. So first off, Louise, how are you today?
I am very well, thank you. I'm isolated.
It's the real world we live in.
That's right. We're doing our best. Nobody loves it, but
we're doing our best. So I'd love to start at Georgetown because you were there in the late 60s during just an unbelievably fascinating and sometimes troubled time in the world, in the country. Talk a little bit about, going to Georgetown, getting into Georgetown. I think you were in the School of Language and Linguistics, and for you younger alumni out there and students, that school doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
That was one of the, and also I know that you actually were one of the first women involved in when the college went co-ed and involved. I'd love to hear about that. So talk a little bit about, you decided to go to Georgetown. You knew you wanted to go to Georgetown. You grew up in DC or somewhere near there. How did you?
No, I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island.
Okay.
So clearly, and there were many schools in Boston, and my mother said, go to Boston, you can come home every weekend. And I said,
right.
Uh-oh. I got to go somewhere farther away than that. So my brother was at CU at the time. I looked at that. I looked at Trinity, but that was all girls. I come from a convent school. So Georgetown at that time was 5 boys to every girl. Now, that's not the reason I went there, really.
For the record.
I just walked through those streets and I fell in love with it. You know how sometimes you get just a feeling like, I got to have this. This is me. I got to have this. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty flexible being a third child, so I can easily say, I don't have to have this. You have it. But I had to have it. So I fought off. The head nun at my school said, that's a boys' school. And I said, yeah. And my parents said, it's so far away. And I said, yeah. But I was brought up bilingually, so I figured a French major would be pretty easy. But
yeah,
it wasn't. It was one of the very solid schools of languages up there with Middlebury and so forth at the time. Yeah. So it was very demanding, and it was wonderful. Being from a small town in New England, I was absolutely terrified to go to this place, which looks so sophisticated. There was immediately post-Camelot, kind of, Yeah. And it was so glamorous. Lucy Baines Johnson was in my class.
All right.
And I thought, I will never be able to handle all this international intrigue and glamour and beauty and sophistication, and I'm terrified. The day my parents dropped me off at St. Mary's Hall, which was the freshman girls' dorm at the time, there was a guy standing on the steps, really good looking, greeting the cars as they came through. And he opened the door of the car and he said, hi, I'm Bill Clinton, president of the sophomore class. These boys from the Key Club will take your bags up.
Wow, there you go.
Not him, though. So
yeah, right.
He shook my hand, then he ran around the car, shook my mother's hand, my father's hand. I said, these people are going back to Rhode Island. He'll never see them again. What's he doing? But as time went on, it became pretty clear he had a card file in his head that was pretty enormous and very effective. So anyway, after about 3 days, I thought, wow, I really belong here. This is the coolest place on earth. And I've talked to a lot of undergraduates who feel that way. I mean, we meet them here at the Georgetown Club of Oregon and Southwest Washington. We have a going away party for them every year, except this year. And so I get to meet them when we have returning students, and they say, no, it's just magic. You either get Hoya-ness or you don't. Right. And I think most people really get it, especially if we see them again at reunions and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, it really was magic. And it was so liberal and so free. It was, a different kind of Catholicism as well. The Jesuits are like, well, if you can't, if you're too hungover to go to church on Sunday, go on Monday. And this made such sense to me.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. I lived in a dorm with all these girls, and we all went there being like, second in our class and the president of everything. And, but we were all that way.
Right.
But we did not impress each other at all. We just loved each other, and we imagined a girls' dorm. So we'd sit around talking about boys and professors and clothes and, late into the night. And it was just the most beautiful experience. And I'm still Zooming with 9 of those girls once a week.
Is that right? Wow.
Well, renewed during the COVID thing,
Sure.
but we do get
Sure.
together at least once a year also. And we were all terrified to show up, the smartest girl in Cleveland, Ohio, the smartest girl in Skokie, Illinois. But we were fine. We did fine. So
Yeah.
it was a wonderful time. We always wore skirts and little heels to school. Pants were not allowed yet.
Wow.
It was a 70s thing.
Yeah.
Everybody looked incredibly fabulous all the time. There was a Miss Georgetown contest where the most beautiful girls would do like glamour photography. And that was in the Courier. One of the first things I did was sign up for the Courier magazine, which was a magazine of the East Campus, which was then the Foreign Service School, the Language School, and the Business School.
Huh. Okay.
And it was a glossy magazine, and it was very pretentious, and it tried to be literary sometimes, and it had wacky undergraduate drawings, and it was really cool. I loved it.
How long did that last until?
I don't know how old it was when I got there. I got there in 65. I don't know. It must be buried somewhere in the archives.
Yeah, I don't know much about that.
Yeah, but I got into profiles there, interviewing interesting people, and that was just the best thing
of your future career.
Yeah, right. And it was just so much fun. I remember sitting there one night in the bottom of whatever hall it was, White Gravener, and thinking, gosh, people get paid to do this? This is unbelievable.
Wow.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a French teacher. This is where the heart lies. And of course, I'd always been a reader and a writer. So when the college became co-ed in 1968, they announced it would be co-ed. And of course, the next class of 70, would have girls.
Right.
I said, well, I want to do it right now. I want to minor in English. And so they said, oh, okay. And it was amazing. I remember a class in, again, White Gravener, huge classroom, 70 boys and me.
Wow.
It was called The Theory of Evolution and Evolution of Satire. And I sat in the front row, and at one point the professor said, Ms. Lague, at this point I always tell a dirty joke, so if you'd like to leave the room. And I said, no way, I'm going to hear the dirty joke. Yeah. I got brothers, I know what you're doing. But it was the first time he had a girl in class. He really didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
To this day, a lot of those boys know who I am, but I don't know who they are because they all sat behind me. Right. But I go to reunions and, I remember you from that class.
You were the first woman to minor in English.
In English, yeah. As far as I know. I mean, so, I'm sure somebody minored in chemistry or something, right. But yeah, I was the first one. Wow. History.
Yeah. And what about, although obviously there was a lot of, obviously incredibly fond memories, you also were there during, tremendous turmoil in the country. So you were
That's
there
right.
during the protests, and was that in 68 or 68?
Also 1968, yeah, the war protests were beginning, but the big one that we went through was the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And of course, all of a sudden there were demonstrations and riots and the kind of thing we're having in Portland right now. Yeah. And if you can picture Wisconsin Avenue, the glamour, it was more glamorous then, walking down there and seeing boarded up windows and soldiers in fatigues and sandbags on the sidewalk. It was so scary to a whatever 17 or 18-year-old, and all of us. It was just before Easter vacation, and the university closed up, sent us all home. It was hard to get there. We were jumping into, calling people with cars instead of you going to the airport, or can you drive me home or whatever. So I managed to get to the airport, flying home to Providence, and my head was absolutely reeling. It was one of those, lose your virginity and reality experiences, like the day Kennedy was shot. It was one of those, like, oh, Camelot, right. And here, soldiers, boarded up window, riots, flames, looting. Wow, unbelievable. And these thoughts kept coming in. So I got home and I said hi to Mom and Dad, and I went down to the basement again and wrote this whole story about what I had witnessed and what I had felt about it and how weird it was. And I called the Providence Journal. I had nerve in those days. And I said, would you like an eyewitness story from an actual college student? Because college students were very, very popular at the time. Yeah. Nobody understood what we were doing. Okay. Oh, yeah, well, we'll give it a try. So I drove it in, dropped it off, long copy paper. And when I got back, my father said, oh, the editor has been calling you to ask you if you would like a summer job.
Huh, look at that.
And he loves the story, and he's running the whole thing tomorrow. And it went on for 2 full-size pages.
Wow.
I was so impressed with myself. But it was a great day in my life, because I think there are these days where you think you have something, or you have something you want to share, and somebody takes it seriously. Mm-hmm. And that was really a great day, and it really got me started. Next summer, I wrote weddings and engagements for the Providence Journal in Rhode Island. They covered every single one, of course. Yeah.
But also really showed the beginnings of your journalistic mind and how you think about the fact that someone would want to read. You had the hook and you understood that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a little marketing thing there too, I guess. But yeah, and I used to be better at this when I was young and everything was newer, but I could see things and describe them and write them down. So that was wonderful. I loved it.
All right. So you had this amazing Georgetown experience. So when you left, did you remember consciously saying, I want to be a journalist, I want to write, or did you have a different?
Absolutely. And the difficult thing was I wanted to write. I didn't want to research. I didn't want to.
You wanted to do just the fun part.
Yeah, I'm not much of a troublemaker. I didn't want to uncover dirt. I'm not that persistent, but I just wanted to write. However, the route was through newspapers at that time, unless you had a friend at the New Yorker or something.
Right.
So I got a job as a cub reporter at the late great Washington Daily News, which is a tabloid size. Looked a lot like the New York Daily News, and it was the one that the cab drivers read. It was a little bit more sophisticated, but opened my world quite a lot. I reviewed the first ballet I ever saw. And then the next day, maybe I had to call the mother of a boy who'd been murdered in a gang fight.
Wow.
And I was just, this little Catholic girl, like, this is so rude. I called her up and I said, I know you probably don't want to talk about Willie. And she talked about him, and, he wasn't a great kid. I mean, she loved him, but he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. And I mean, it was amazing how little we know until we, push the boundaries a little bit.
So how long did you work there? You were there?
About 2.5 years. And then it got bought. Such was the beginning of media.
Like media consolidation and merger.
Consolidation, thank you. Yes, it was bought by the Washington Star, which was a bigger news, was the afternoon newspaper. And looking historically again, we're in the early 70s, and Watergate was a big story, big international story, and Vietnam and Watergate. And they're both very difficult factually, and they're very dry, and they're very serious.
Very serious.
And so our smart editor by then, Jim Bellows, had come in from Los Angeles. I don't know if you know his name.
Okay.
He came in. He was more of a showbiz guy, and we were competing against the Washington Post, which means Woodward and Bernstein, and Sally Quinn, and that whole thing going on. And Bellows said, "You know what? I think we need to have a little mood lightener here in the paper. So we're going to Watergate on the front page, but we need a gossip column." And once again, little girl from Rhode Island runs into the corner. Write a gossip column. But I did, because he had a very, very funny fellow writer of mine lined up, Diana McClellan, who was British. She was 10 years older than me, and she was just hilarious. So we put together this style, which I can't really describe, but it was very loving. Everything we said was how adorable that Sally Quinn and Ben Bradley are dating, and his wife doesn't seem to mind at all. You know, I mean, we did stuff like that, and everything was very and it was very popular. It was syndicated in 60 newspapers.
Did it have a name?
Yeah, it was called The Ear.
The Ear. Okay.
And we got a page, the press page in Time magazine. And that was really exciting. That was my only famous moment at 26, the only moment I've ever been famous. I've always had fun, but that was famous. That got old after a while.
Experience at such a young age, too.
I know. And I took it for granted. You know, when you're 26, you say, "Oh, yeah, this is me. Yeah.
Right.
I'm great. I can do this."
Right.
Yeah. It was all downhill.
To know how that moved into, I know you first worked at Us Weekly before People, so you had a stint there, but I'm curious, you know, because People is, and still is, the granddaddy of magazines, and by far the most successful magazine still on the planet. So that was an incredible gig to get, I assume. So how did you do that?
Well, I was very, very lucky. First of all, People was started in 1974. And just around 1976 or 7, the New York Times decided to imitate it. They said, you know, Time Inc. and the New York Times are always competitive for like no good reason. Like Amazon and Google, they're in different businesses, but they're still competitive. So Time Magazine, New York Times said, "We can do this. It's really easy." So they started this magazine called Us. And
that was started by the New York Times.
Yeah, right.
Where?
But they didn't know how to do it, and they are the New York Times. You're familiar with those people. They would not let the staff tell anybody that they were owned by the New York Times. I presume, and I'm just going off a limb here, that the New York Times thought it was too embarrassing to be doing a gossip magazine. Yeah. So I was brought up there. The Star was dying. It was about to be sold. We were given bonuses for leaving. So at the same time, I got an offer from Us Magazine, somebody I didn't know, but he knew the column and so forth. So I went up there and looked at it, and I said, "Oh, New York, this is cool. I'll do this." Yeah. So went there as a senior editor, and my job was like turning down publicists and trying to convince writers to write for $300 instead of $1,200. And never saying, "But it's the New York Times." Right. So after 4 months of that, it was a good time, except for not ever having anything to do at work. I went to my immediate boss and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to quit." I had a friend at People who said, "If you don't like it there, call me." That's the secret, by the way. Yeah. It's luck. That's luck. And so he said, "You know, we all hate it here. We're all going to quit next Friday. So let's do it all at once." So we did that. And then I was drafted over to People, and that was such a special experience. You know, yeah, it was amazing.
And you ended up having a 18-year career?
18 years, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk about what your, because you ultimately ended up spending a lot of your time covering the royals and covering Princess Diana. I think you had 42 covers people, and 28 were Diana. Is that true?
I'm Princess Diana. Yeah, we couldn't put out enough covers. She sold.
Yeah, she was sold so well. It's incredible.
Every time, whether it was a good week for Diana or a bad week, it didn't matter.
Yeah. So how did you work your way into that part of your?
Yeah. Well, ordinarily, you belong to a little group. My little group was, writers, theater, stuff like that. Not movies, television so much. But I got into this because I had a baby. I was on maternity leave when William was born. I was about to be born. And they called me up and said, this is very young staff, and nobody knows how to spell episiotomy or prenatal trauma or anything like that. So would you come in and do the story about the pregnancy and the forthcoming christening? So I said, sure, because, I really missed the action. I really did. Right. So I went in, and as timing, as you know, you get reports from London or LA or wherever the story is, long files, pieces of paper, long telegrams, basically, and put it all together. And you have to glue it together in 200 lines or more or less. Wow. For the American audience, because Brits will get excited if Diana combs her hair differently. We don't care that much about that. Right. Also, they have very loose libel laws, at least at the time. They probably still do. Right. And they could just say anything they were thinking. And we couldn't do that. We had fact checkers, we had lawyers, we had a reputation, the Time Inc. reputation. So it was a question of crafting this stuff very, very carefully, and it was big fun. And it was a huge story, and it involved history and geography and language and the royal family, the family tree, and the jewels and the clothes and the horses and the real estate. So it's very hard to keep track of it all. Mm-hmm. And I was keeping track of it. So they just gave me all the stories one after another, and it was extremely fun, because it was very well read, and it was full of surprises. You never knew what was going to happen next. Yeah.
What are some of your most memorable Princess Diana stories? Or
Princess Diana stories? Wow. I'd always been a Charles fan. We're kind of contemporaries. I watched him grow up in the pages of Life magazine.
Yeah.
And so here's this little girl, and she was just too young, and they were a terrible match. And she wanted desperately to make it work, and he had a whole different thing going on. He had a job, a duty, a sense of duty, an assignment. And I think, gosh, it's so hard to do the favorites. One of them is where she fell asleep. She fell asleep in a concert when she was pregnant, and she was visibly thin and lots of bone showing. And that was when we started to think about the bulimia. Not us, but the Brits. And there was another one, her first royal engagement, when she's getting out of a car. And she's getting out, instead of swinging her knees over to the side and standing up, she's getting out like this, and terrible décolletage, everything falling out. Queen, very upset, allegedly, who knows. That was a good one. But the really what, and she very early began to whine about Charles is still seeing this woman, this old girlfriend, and he's ruining my marriage and so forth. But very soon we began to see that she was actually dating Hewitt, who was allegedly her riding coach, except she didn't ride. So I think she just went over there. Yeah. Who knows? And he had the red hair, so to this day people will say, well, Harry, is he really?
Yeah.
But if you look at Harry carefully, he is really one of them, not Hewitt. And all the time, so this is going on, and then there was a soccer player, and she was calling his wife, and there were all these stories. And what really was remarkable for me, usually I'm just reporting and saying, here's what's going on, here's the story, and at the end of one of them, I suggested that if she was going to whine about her husband's infidelity, she should pull her socks up, which is, British expression meaning,
Right.
come on, pull your pants, be a girl, big girl panties, Well, people wrote in those days they wrote in, how dare you?
So they were not happy with Louise.
Oh no, it was a little bit disapproving, of the princess who was perfect, whom they loved.
Right.
And well, I learned something from that. None of my business if she should pull her socks up or not.
Right.
A lot of people identified with her. A lot of women, they'll say like, "Oh, I was abandoned by my husband too." Yeah, I'm watching her. I wish I were 5'10" and size 4 and blonde. And they also saw in her somebody who was very tender and loving and charitable and smiling and very charming. I actually never met her, but you absorb all of this through things that I read. The great kind of the turning point here in the story is that one night in May, I don't remember what year it was, 1993, maybe 1992, I was invited by the advertising staff to go to London with the beauty clients. So these are like Maybelline and L'Oreal and all these people. And for fun, the advertising staff is like throwing money out the window all the time. But these people, sorry,
those were the days.
Fascinated. Those are the days, right? I never saw the drink cart, by the way, but too young. Saw the shoe shine boy person. Anyways, so we all went over there to London, and I was invited to kind of entertain my capacity as royals writer. We were the London correspondent, Fred Hopfrier, bought tickets to a small event, which was a benefit for the Royal Ballet. 150 people, 15 tables of 10, pretty small. And Diana was going to be there. And so we were going to be able to stare at her and probably meet her, because our correspondent said, oh, yes, at the end of these things, she goes around and meets everybody. So we were very excited, and we all sit there and eat, and the Royal Ballet, a little tiny troupe of them come out and they dance, and Diana gets up, and she's not at our table, obviously. She gets up and she shakes hands with the director. His name is Brandt. He's a friend of hers, and she smiles and nods, and she leaves her bouquet on a table, and then walks away. She just leaves. So the clients are disappointed. The correspondent's disappointed because he promised a handshake, and I'm disappointed because I went looking for the bouquet and it was gone. Anyway, I was certainly disappointed. And the next day, our correspondent called me on the phone and he said, you know what happened? She's just decided to leave Charles.
Wow, you think it was right then? It was during that time? Wow.
And it was at the time of the tape that surfaced, this obscenely silly conversation between Charles and Camilla. And he said, I'm going to read this to you. You won't believe it. It's not very attractive. So he did. I will let people Google that if they want to. Yeah, and that really, of course, pissed her off, and that was the end of it.
Wow.
Did not get to meet her.
Wow. Well,
So,
18 years is obviously a long time at one place, and it obviously denotes that you had a great successful career there. Curious what you think, made you a successful writer, reporter, journalist. What do you think were some of the key success factors for you?
wow.
What do you think key success factors are in general to being good at that?
I think in that position, and I never thought about this before, but I have a talent for writing, and I've known it since I was little. I don't have a lot of other talents, I can't count or anything. But we all have something. that
When you
was
say
mine.
talent
And then
for writing, meaning just you've always been great at putting words together and putting words together in
putting words together, right?
a
Yeah, and describing things like we were
interesting
just
way.
talking about. And beyond that, I knew that in this environment, I had to deliver the facts, but I also had to entertain, because People was a magazine where all the stories had to end kind of on an up note, like, well, the dog is dead, but in the future they're looking forward to buying a German Shepherd, and that's appropriate. I mean, that's cool. I like that. And that keeps it also from being, screaming scandal headlines. We never did that. We never pointed fingers at anyone, except maybe that pull your socks up thing.
Yeah.
And I think just loving it, I just love people, and I've always been fascinated by what makes them do what they do. Two babies in bassinets at Lenox Hill Hospital, and one of them is going to be a terrorist, and one of them is going to be president of the United States. What goes on in between there? And there's always that turning point in every People story, and in every story about people as well. So I was always fascinated by that, and I think that was helpful, that I knew I was writing about real people. I mean, a very tough one, Jamie Lee Curtis. She was 18 years old. She was in her first movie, Halloween.
Right.
And she was the daughter of Tony Curtis and Debbie Reynolds.
Janet Leigh.
Janet Leigh, thank you. These people are even older than I am. And so a report came in, somebody in LA reporter writes this thing about Jamie Lee Curtis to publicize her movie. And there's absolutely nothing there. Like, she's completely, one-word answers. And she's 18. She's never had any experience with anything, no heartbreaks, probably not even a dying dog. And it was the most difficult thing to write, because there wasn't anything to write yet. I mean, today you do a lot with Jamie Lee Curtis. She's amazing. Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that was difficult, was making something out of nothing. But most people have amazing stories. Yeah. Famous, not famous, amazing stories.
Well, it's one of the great hallmarks of People is they also tell amazing stories about regular, everyday people too.
That's right.
It wasn't just about the celebrities.
We made a big point of that. I don't know if I guess they still do. Yeah.
Yeah. Extraordinary things about ordinary people and ordinary.
Yeah. It was kind of there was actually a 50-50 or 40-60 break in there that was deliberate every week. Yeah.
So just in hearing you, clearly the love of what you do, the passion is tremendously important. Work ethic must have been. I mean, you must have been, deadline often and having to work crazy hours, especially if you're dealing with Europe. And so I'm sure the work ethic pieces can't go unnoticed.
Yeah, I once woke up, Andrew Morton, who wrote that book about Diana that blew everything wide open, her real story. And I once called him, and I was late at night in New York, and I had to ask him a question about something, and he said, "You just woke me up. It's 3:00 in the morning in London." Well, you get confused about stuff like this. It was very hard work. It was harder than anyone could imagine, because we had all these reams and reams of paper. Yeah. You had the business of learning the people's style, which is quite different from, well, it's just like time, but it's different from anybody else's.
Right.
And you had the challenge of jumping up and down on the copy and making every word count. But also, it had to go through this huge ladder of editors. Mm-hmm. And it then had to be fact-checked, word for word, a check over every word. And then the researcher, they would special people, fact-checkers, right? And they would bring it back to me, and then they'd say, now this word, jumper. Do you mean a jumper, like a thing without sleeves, or do you mean a British sweater? Was it a warm friendship or a tarred affair? And so we go through all this fact checking, which was also fascinating, by the way. Yeah. And then when we were done with that, and smoothing the language over a little bit. And then you would wait, now it's like 10 p.m. or so, for the lawyer. So the lawyer, Nick Jollymore and somebody else, would come back and say, I don't think we can say pull up your big girl panties. You know what?
Yeah.
I don't think we can say that she's definitely having an affair with this Egyptian doctor. I think that we might lean on the rumors. A lot of people say, you know,
Right.
yeah. So that was the lawyer. So now it's midnight,
Right.
and about 1 o'clock, you get signed off by the managing editor, who's the boss. And then I went home in a car, in a limousine, not a limousine, but you know,
Car service.
car service, all the way to Connecticut. And I thought, I am so important. I mean, I stayed up all night, but I get a car home. This is cool.
Yeah.
They had a way of keeping you from whining about some of the more difficult things. I mean, you know, they served us a dinner every closing night, which is 3 nights a week in the conference room, so that we wouldn't wander off and drink and forget to come back. Yeah. And it was really wonderful that way. There's a lot of respect for everybody. These were like some of the smartest people I've ever met, and they were pretty motley crew most of the time, but they were.
Well, so you had a storied career there, and then you moved more into the freelance world, right? And it looks like you wrote for a number of different publications.
I did. All this time, the 18 years, I was in and out, having a baby, having another baby, coming back for special issues. I didn't go back full time till 1991. And so in the meantime, I was, you know, spinning out freelance stuff. I wrote for some women's magazines. I worked with Oprah magazine. I got some assignments from there when it was brand new. I remember interviewing Gayle King, actually, among other things. And the New York Times, I would pitch travel pieces to them, and I got a few of those. So it's funny, though, all your time at People magazine is like, at the time, it was the second best circulation after TV Guide. I don't know if that's still happening. Yeah. Nobody paid, you know, and when I was there, at first you did not get a byline. Very soon we did get a byline, but nobody.
I noticed that for many years they didn't have.
Yeah, at first you were just like staff writer. We did get a byline eventually, but nobody got really impressed until you were in the New York Times, you know, even in the People staff, you know, oh, you're in the New York Times. Now you're serious. That's important. That's really good. So I did a lot of that freelancing for women's magazines, and I got into things like coping with your crabby man, because, you know, I'm really interested in psychology. And so I got into these things where I had to interview a bunch of shrinks, and you had to do that. So you had reliable sources explaining.
You froze again. Did I freeze again too?
Yes.
No, bummer. Let's see.
And you're not even smiling.
That's too bad.
That's better.
We're back. All right. So go back and say, then would you say that you, the thing about, I wrote about your crabby husband or whatever.
Yes. These are they're now called behavioral stories. At the time, there was really no word for it. So in other words, it was about psychology, and I would round up, you know, 14 experts on crabbiness. And that
was an area you were interested in general.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not just the crabbiness, but the psychology.
Right.
And I wrote for some working mother magazines, and so there's all this freelancing out there at the time, and you always have to know somebody, though. And working at Time Inc., you only knew other people at Time Inc.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
If I had to give any career advice, I'd say go to, you know, run out of the building and go to the women's press club meeting, or, you know, go meet network. Somebody. I met other people. Yeah, network. We didn't even have that word, but that would have been a smart thing to do. But somehow through people, I met people at these magazines and managed to get assignments and pitch assignments. And once that editor is gone from that magazine, you're dead, you know.
Yeah. Clean house.
If he or she may go on to another magazine.
Right.
And that's helpful, but not always. So that is a precarious way to make a living. I liked it because it had big variety, but
it's a very different way of living than being a staff writer
It certainly is. Being a staff writer is very rare. I mean, a treasured position even then, you know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So then you interestingly had a, bit of a career switch because you referenced your interest in psychology. So why don't you tell the audience what you did next?
Well, I've always been interested in psychology, and the day after graduation from Georgetown, I went to visit Dean Ruckel, who was the dean of women, and I said, suppose I'm interested in psychology, what do I have to do?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, you got to get a master's, and you have to get a doctorate, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you can't do it here. I can't do it at Georgetown. No, we don't have that stuff. I'm sure they do now.
Oh, they definitely do now, yeah.
At the time, I was a girl reporter, and I was having so much fun. And I said, I can postpone this indefinitely. I have a cool job. I'm learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much fun. So at the age of 50, I went back to graduate school.
Good for you.
And I was lured into this by the passion for psychology I've been talking about, and also by Princess Diana, because she was so disturbed. I don't want to make her sound wacko, but it was clear, not just me, but if you look closely enough, there was this tremendous need for adoration and approval and have all of Charles's attention. Not all her temper tantrums were quite warranted. So I looked at that. And on the other hand, there's this very perfect face out in the world, and certainly, lots of good things about her, but this other dark side. And so that just kind of reinforced my issue. Yeah. My understanding of this. And also I loved doing those behavior stories. I thought, well, I'm going to become a professional. I'm not going to have to call up every shrink in the world about experts on crabbiness. I'm going to be one. Yeah. And I didn't actually intend to be one. I intended to write about behavior with an academic background. And as soon as I graduated, we had 9/11. And I lived in Greenwich, town closest to New York. Many, many people from Greenwich were affected by that. And I would see 8 funeral processions in a day. And I thought, and no magazines were not asking for copy. Every writer in the world wanted to say something about this. And the magazine said, we could be dead tomorrow. We have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know if you remember that. So I said, well, I got to go into counseling. I got to do this now because people need this now. Everybody was reaching out and hugging their children and trying to mend up their relationships. So I did. I got a little office in Greenwich, and I put out a shingle, and I did counseling. I really, really liked it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was so interesting. It was just amazing. I was so lucky, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you do that for quite a while?
I did. I did it there for quite a while. And after I moved here to Portland, I started again for a while. And then, your mind changes about things, your life changes. I started to travel, and, I could no longer stick with appointments and that kind of thing. So I'm still doing some freelancing. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody anymore.
Didn't you write a book as well?
Yeah, I wrote a few books. Well, back in '91, I wrote a book about signed by one of the parents' magazines about working parents and a working mom. And it was kind of how to be a working mom without any help whatsoever, but that was unspoken from your husband. And then more recently, I just married a man in Portland 10 years ago who is a publisher, and we wrote a book about our year off. We took a year off to travel around Mexico and Europe.
Is that right?
And we had a blog, and so we wrote that book. I wrote something else I can do as a counselor is I wrote an advice book called Ask Lammy. And that was a roundup of my Facebook page, Ask Lammy. If you ever have any questions about how to deal with yourself as a midlife person or the new COVID etiquette, or I get letters from the president sometimes and his wife asking for advice. And so, so that was a book. And right now, in this time where I can't go anywhere or do anything, I'm writing my first novel, and I'm pretty excited about that.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the part that I think is so intriguing and compelling is that you've written in so many forms. You don't always see that, right? You've been a journalist, a magazine writer, and reporter, and you've been a freelance writer, and you've written for newspapers and magazines and blogs, and now you've been a nonfiction author, a fiction author. I mean, that's
Fiction author. Yeah, I'll try anything, you know.
great.
I even once wrote a story for Life magazine, I forgot that, about defense spending. I mean, it was terrible. I had to go around.
How you made that one interesting.
Well, if you're only struggling to learn it yourself, you cannot make it interesting because you have no background.
Right.
So I think that was probably heavily edited. They never signed me anything like that again.
Yeah. What would your, as we conclude our fascinating chat today, what advice would you give someone who's interested in writing and being a writer? What are some of your, and again, this could be someone at any point in their life. It doesn't even have to be a recent graduate. This could be someone who's, who's been out for 20 or 30 years, who's always had a passion for writing and wants to do something with it. What would some advice?
Outlets on paper, I wouldn't go there first. Magazines, newspapers are folding by the gazillion. However, I think that the internet has actually opened up a lot of opportunities for writers.
Right.
As I look for freelance, and you look around and say, how to find a freelance work. And I say, yeah, you can write a blog for a stuffed animal company and we'll pay you 2 cents a word or, $10 total. So if you are just starting out, there are many, many opportunities online because people it's an information economy. They need things written still. It's not all pictures yet, or all YouTube. So yeah, it can be done. It can start at any age. I think it's one of those things where the older you are, the smarter you are, the more experienced you are, the better you get. But of course, it's a little hard to do a penny a word at a certain age. So I would say that, and there are writers groups everywhere.
Is that right? Okay.
Doing fiction.
You mean online?
You can get together, even online, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, people aren't getting together anymore. That would be more fun. But yes, even online, there are many, many websites like Reedsy, Reedsy, which funnels people into editors and agents and how to write a book and how to do this. And there's profit in that. So all the many, many people who want to be writers are now have tremendous outlets for it. I think it's actually bigger now than it was before.
And it's democratized it because in the old days you had these big gatekeepers. Now, if you have something to write, you can express yourself.
You can express yourself quite freely, just as you're doing here on the
right.
Yeah,
and
nobody stops you.
Nobody can stop us, Louise.
That's right. You can't stop us from trying anyway.
That's for sure.
So I would say, yeah, this is actually an opportunity time as long as you're not stuck on paper.
Right. No, I think that's a more challenging business than ever. But like you said, there are lots of other opportunities.
Yes, instead of a pyramid, it's like this, wide, broad spectrum of opportunities. So, yeah, stick with it.
This is fantastic, Louise. This has been really a fun, almost 50 minutes, and what a wonderful and intriguing career you've had. And I loved walking down Georgetown memory lane with you as well, because I've always been fascinated with the 60s era at Georgetown, and really having someone bring it to life was really compelling. So thank you.
And having Bill Clinton as president of the student council.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And we knew something was going to happen. He first ran for office in 3rd grade, apparently. But it was pretty cool. He's a neat guy.
Yeah, no, it's neat. Well, thank you, Louise. All the best. Stay safe, please. And wishing you all the best with your new novel as well.
Thank you, Rich. I'll let you know when it's published.
You should. You better. We'll let
put it in the new newsletter.
Know about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Louise.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.